Welcome back to It's All Fun and Games. Today I'm at the Retro Gaming Expo in Garden City, New York, and I'm going to go around and raise up an old blood rivalry from the 16-bit generation. That's right, I'm talking about Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. Let's go around and see what these people think is the greatest 16-bit console of all time. All right, I'm here with Nick, and we are going to talk about the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. So, Nick, first question for you. When you were younger, when you were growing up, which one did you have? Which one did you pick, Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis?
Well, I was 3, and my parents just got me a Super Nintendo, so that's the one I've always played for all my life.
Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, which one did you go with?
Super Nintendo, definitely.
I went with the Super Nintendo as well.
Honestly, I probably would say the Super Nintendo.
I think the Super Nintendo was more my jam.
I'm more than a little biased. I was definitely an SNES kid. Still have a lot of my original carts, so SNES all the way for me.
I would have to say Super Nintendo.
In my family, we were hoodwinked by Genesis, their ad campaign, which is also, it was all about, Genesis is awesome. Super Nintendo is for losers, it's for babies. And I wasn't a baby. I was a 10-year-old boy, so I went with Genesis. And I regretted it.
Absolutely, it was the Genesis. Mainly because my brother was much older than me, so he was deemed allowed to play the Genesis. They were like, "You're too young. Charlie, you're too young. Here's a Super Nintendo. Here's Mario games." And I was like, "But the Blood games."
What do you think the best exclusives for the Super Nintendo are?
I'd say probably Super Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger, the Final Fantasies.
Super Metroid all the way, Link to the Past, all of them. They're all great.
Super Mario Brothers, you think Zelda, you think, Earthbound.
Probably the Mario games were my favorite. I think there's a Castlevania title in there that came out.
Zelda or Mario, those ones are really good, in my opinion.
Now for Sega Genesis, what do you think the best exclusives were for that system?
I really remember enjoying Vector Man. I remember enjoying Sonic, of course.
Well, you got your Sonic 1, you got your Sonic 2, you got your Sonic 3. But I'd be hard-pressed to think of many others.
Sonic was also, classic.
I mean, aside from Sonic, because Sonic is Sonic, I don't know, maybe Golden Axe, Rocket Knight is definitely one of them.
Their Streets of Rage series, I think. Yeah, I like that series a lot, honestly. I mean, Sega had the cool stuff like Toe Jam and Earl. I mean, they had those, a lot of those, like Streets of Rage. They had those fun, kind of off the beaten path titles.
Back in the 90s, they had some really fierce advertising going on. Sega Genesis does what Nintendo don't. What do you think about that?
You know what? I thought it was pretty funny back then, how they actually competed against each other in the marketing and advertising.
Yes, the advertisement was quite literally like, "Hey, you like Nintendo? You're an idiot."
Do you think that caused a lot of schoolyard arguments?
I know it did for me. The chubby kid talking about Genesis, and everyone's like, "No, Super Nintendo." I'm like, "You're just saying that because you don't have a Genesis."
I think it made the rivalry more fierce. Do I believe it was true? Absolutely not.
Okay, and did you believe any of that hubbub about blast processing?
No, not at all.
Well, rivalries are always fun, but in reality, it's about the games. If you got the good games, it doesn't matter what system you're running it on, and I think that holds true even today. Maybe even more so today.
Console wars have never been as heated as they were back then. But to this day, you have your Genesis guys, you have the Nintendo guys.
Nowadays, with those video game companies, they might throw some shade here and there, but they won't directly attack another video game company. Back then, it was different. Back then, it was really only you either had Nintendo or Sega. Sony didn't really come into the picture just yet. So I definitely think that those advertising campaigns definitely did help Sega just a bit.
Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, a world where one did not exist and only one did. Which one would you pick? Which world would you want to live in?
I think I have to keep Super Nintendo around.
If I was the sole decider and I was the one who said there can only be one, it would be Nintendo.
Do you think that Sega Genesis universe is some sort of dystopian future?
I think that's an understatement, man. I think a world without Nintendo, especially the toys that they had very, very early on as well, would have been a serious loss. We would have done gamers a real disservice.
You go back in time, you change one thing, all of a sudden, instead of having a regular Hitler, you have a mega Hitler. You know? You don't know. You can't tamper with these things. Didn't you watch Back to the Future?
I definitely would like to see a timeline where maybe Nintendo's fate was that of Sega's in this one.
So I know that we don't get good Sonic games anymore. So the idea of living in a world with like Sonic Fighter 9, where it's Sonic and his terrible side characters versus the, very amazing Super Smash. I would want Nintendo to win, but I with a tear in my eye.
Do you think that Sega Genesis for Super Nintendo can be put to rest?
No.
Never?
Never.
The rivalry continues.
Yeah, screw you, Sega. No, I'm kidding. Sega has a lot of good games, but I prefer Nintendo.
Super Nintendo for life.
There you have it, guys. It seems that more people at this convention preferred Super Nintendo over the Sega Genesis. Me, on the other hand, I lean a little bit more towards the Sega Genesis because of some of my favorite games like Shinobi 3, Streets of Rage, and Toe Jam and Earl. Let me know what you guys prefer down in the comments below, Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis. Let's keep this blood feud going on for as long as we can. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. And remember, it's all fun and games.